Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Latino Vote Podcast. We have survived the 2024 election. Well, I think we survived. Mike, have you survived?
I'm in Mexico, brother, so I'm going to make it one way or the other. I'm either going to survive by keeping my blood pressure down or survive by being in a different country. But look, I say that in jest. Look, America's going to be okay. The Republic's going to survive. There's a lot of tough fights ahead for everybody. But there's also a lot to talk about, Chuck. I mean, we've got a lot of stuff to sift through. So what are you thinking about right now, just 48 hours after D-Day here?
Well, I appreciate everybody reaching out, and I appreciate everybody following and being such avid listeners to this podcast. You know, I reflect on days like today, no matter who won, of being very appreciative of folks who've trusted to listen to me and listen to Mike Madrid and, you know, think to get to this end. I remind everybody, and I said this on TV a while ago, is that elections are emotional. People get really invested in elections because it has so much to do with our everyday lives. And you're not always going to win every election. And it's not the end of the world if you don't. I think that what Kamala said in her remarks is that, look, if you didn't win, that's fine. Then do something to change it. Let's get involved and do things. But just know that it didn't end like a lot of us wanted to end. We learn from the lessons that we can learn from, and then we get better as we go forward. I have made that my career for over 30 years, and I'm still no expert at it, but I learn something every election, and I learned something this election. And I'm going to give this giant softball underhand throw to Mike Madrid and say, Mike, what's the one thing that you really learned from this election? As I go.
I'll go ahead and take a swing at that one off of the tee, and then I'm going to ask you. We're going to get into a lot of the Latino stuff too, and the big shift. It's really truly the big narrative coming out of this election. I think a lot of you that have been listening to the podcast, we're not terribly surprised by it, maybe surprised by the size of it, but not surprised that it was happening. All of our listeners are very engaged. It's a very sophisticated audience. And again, I want to thank all of you guys for being on this journey. We're going to be pouring through this stuff over the coming weeks. And we'll get to it in just a second, but I do want to say this. There are three things that really, I think, surprised me, even as somebody who's been saying this was going to happen with these three things, but the size of them really changed the outcome of the election. The first is turnout. Turnout was very high, okay? And the old idea that high turnout elections help Democrats is proving to no longer be true. And we said this in 2020, right? The highest turnout election of all time actually benefited House Republicans down ticket, even though Donald Trump lost. But the changing nature of our electorate, lower information voters are no longer reliable Democrats. They're becoming more Republicans, including Latinos, specifically Latino men. So high turnout seems to be benefiting Republicans. And low turnout elections, especially all the special elections after Dobbs and the midterms, seem to be benefiting Democrats. That's a very different scenario than we've had at any time in the past. The second is the gender gap. Even though there was a big gender gap in terms of turnout, we did not see much of a discernible difference between the sexes in the way that they were voting and the way that the Harris campaign was expecting, especially white, non-college educated women who broke more for Trump for the third time, guys, third election in a row. It is white, non-college educated women and US-born, non-college educated Latino men that are breaking more Trumpy than everybody expects. That's the largest shift that's going on. And finally, I believed a lot of the press clippings too, as it came to late deciders. The Harris campaign was saying that they weren't just confident, they were supremely confident that the late breaking vote was going to end up benefiting Kamala Harris. This defies everything I've known as a practitioner. Late decided voters almost always break away from the party in power. I thought they were saying something very different. First time in 30 years, I didn't have the benefit of using my own data, my own campaign information. I believe the Harris campaign, maybe they were right, maybe they were wrong, but maybe their data was actually saying that. But the exits are showing the exact opposite. These late breakers voted decidedly for Donald Trump, and that's the trinity of the undoing of the Harris-Walz campaign. High turnout, defying expectations, the gender gap defying expectations, and late deciders defying expectations. Those three things, which I was banking on, all of them breaking towards Harris. She only needed two. She ended up getting none. And that's how Trump got elected, at least from my perspective. Chuck, what biggest surprise for you? What are you seeing out there?
I think if I'm going to lose, I wanted to lose by a lot, and we lost by a lot. And what I mean by that is, from the Latino vote perspective, I want to stop any narrative out there that says Latino voters elected Donald Trump, because they didn't. White voters did. Did Latino voters underperform in lots of places all over the country? Yes. And we're going to talk about that for the next 6 months. Me and Mike Bedred and go into every little precinct and have plenty to talk about. And the shift to the right is real and got even bigger real last night. If you're not admitting that as a Democrat, you're faulting yourself, because we can fix it, as Mike and I have said, but you have to admit you have a problem first. But also, you can have a problem and not be the reason that Donald Trump is the president, which is exactly right. In Pennsylvania, for instance, if you have white women move 1 point towards Donald Trump, that's like Latinos moving 19, because we're only such a small group. But they did move. My God, we'll have that conversation. I think what stuck with me last night is all the things that Mike said. I thought the same thing Mike did. I drank all the Kool-Aid. I thought that the public polls were the public polls, and that folks had better polls than me in North Carolina and Pennsylvania. I knew what the race was in Wisconsin, and I knew what the race was in Arizona, because I had been part of a daily internal tracker, Mike, that's also shocking to me, that was dead on. Like, our tracker in Wisconsin that showed she was going to be even or down one was right. And the Ruben Gallego polling showing that we were outperforming her by 4, 5, 6 points as we stand here today. The Ruben Gallego race has not been called, and right now he's overperforming her by 5%. And a lot of that has to do with Latinos and Latino men. I don't want to get into that right now. We'll have probably a whole podcast about that. So those are the things that kind of stand out to me, is that there wasn't one county in Georgia where Kamala Harris overperformed Joe Biden. That's the tale of the night. And a lot of that has to do with white working class men, white working class women. I'll tell you all a little inside baseball, then I'll flip it back to Mike. When I ran against Joe Biden, when I was running Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign, it was much different than running against Hillary Clinton, because of one thing, Mike, and I think you may find this very interesting, is that when we were running against Hillary Clinton, white men hated Hillary Clinton, really hated her, especially working class whites. I don't know. Anyway, I'm not going to judge putting job. Just a fact. When we ran against Joe Biden, that wasn't the case. Working class white dudes thought Joe Biden was okay. Like, he working Joe, like whatever, like not maybe near the level that Donald Trump was, but we didn't have as big a problem. And our problem were with other folks. And I think some of that was borne out last night, is that he didn't do as good with working with men or white women than Donald Trump did. And how does that land with you, Mike?
Well, I think that's exactly right. I think that's a really great observation. I mean, there was a reason why, Joe Biden has always been Joe from Scranton, Pennsylvania, working class, blue collar neighborhood. And Joe Biden was sort of the last of his kind. He was a blue collar, old school FDR Democrat, working man. And that has been his whole career. And so even if I bet a lot of those men that you were running across may not have even voted for him, but it didn't mean they didn't like him. It wasn't an intensity saying, we just don't like who you are, the culture, and the things that you espouse and what you represent. And I don't want to take anything away from the Kamala Harris campaign. I thought it was extraordinarily impressive. For a 100-day campaign.
100 days is the most impressive thing.
I mean, come on. To anybody. Republicans are tipping the hat. You got to. I mean, what they did, how they resurrected the fortunes of where they were at, the amount of money they raised, and the way they apportioned it. I mean, that was just remarkable. And I believe, and Chuck and I may disagree on this a little bit, I believe a lot of the adjustments that she made were the right ones. I think that crashing to the center is where the future of the Democratic Party is. I think it's where the Latino vote is going. We're going to talk a lot more about that in the coming days, because there's going to be a debate. There's going to be a very heated, substantive debate in the Democratic Party as it does its own autopsy. I'm writing a piece right now called The Latino Autopsy for the Democrats. They're going to have to do some real self-reflection and say, who are we? Was this crash to the right move? Should we go back and scrap border security and double down on immigration reform? Should we go back to appealing to Latinos the way that we have been and just do it more and stronger and better and invest more in these programs? Or are we going to chart a new path in a new direction? And that's going to be, we're going to be part of that discussion here on the podcast. It's going to play out. There's going to be voices on both sides. They're both legitimate. I've got my very strong opinions about those, as you know, but I'm not a Democrat. So, take it with a grain of salt. I am an advocate for Latino voters and the Latino community. I don't think anybody doubts that. But I also want to say, to varying degrees, this doesn't surprise. It doesn't surprise me. I'm not going to speak for you, Chuck. The size did surprise me. I'm not going to say it didn't. Okay, if these exit polls are to be believed, and I guarantee $1 to a donut, when we get the catalyst data and we get everything back, it probably will not be as big a shift as the exits are suggesting. It will probably be high 30s is what you ended up getting, not low 40s. I could be wrong about that. Who knows? We'll just have to wait and see. But when you're talking about this kind of a shift, when it was being completely downplayed, you've got to ask yourself a lot of organizational questions, kind of the way the Republicans did in 2012, and really assess everything from top to bottom. Is our polling right? Is our research right? Is our processes right? Is our field operation working? Is our message matrix accurate? Now is the time to do that, because as somebody who's been waving the flag since the 2016 election saying, you're going to lose more vote share, you're going to lose more vote share, and being accurate each time, I'm not going to sit here and tell you, I told you so. I'm going to sit here and say, doesn't matter if Mike Madrid was right or wrong. But what my advice is, you got to do some inventory as a party. You got to take a pause. You got to look at everything top to bottom. You can't be afraid to look under the hood and do a diagnosis on what's gone wrong here. Because if you don't, and I don't just mean DNC, I mean every state party, everyone, not just California, not just Texas. I'm talking, Tennessee, North Carolina, Wisconsin. You got to look at this vote and realize it's going to grow by it's going to grow by another 5 million in 4 years, 5 million more. It's growing. And this idea that you can still win the Latino vote by or win elections with the greater pie theory that you're hearing from some of these folks on social media, but lose bigger shares of the Latino vote is a misnomer. It is wrong. You can't get those margins anymore when you're losing this much of the vote for this long. This is not new, folks. It's been going on since 2012. That's when Madrid started waving the alarm bells and saying it's happening. And there's a lot of voices saying you're full of shit. You're a right-wing Republican and you're lying. You don't understand the methodology. I'm going to say it again. There's a problem. There's a problem, and you got to look at it, man. You got to look at it, because you can't fix it if you keep denying it.
I don't know what the hell this pie theory thing is on the Twitters, but I didn't know they sold pies on Twitter, but I'm down to get some if they're good pies, like my mama used to make. My favorite pie was pecan pie. And there's an argument in the South on whether it's pecan or pecan. Where I come from, it's pecan, but I digress. And I don't think I even said that right. One of the things that really, again, shocked me last night that we should look at, and I led into this in other podcasts, are looking at the difference, girls and boys, about who and how battleground states perform, where we competed for this Latino vote, compared to states where we didn't compete. What I mean by compete is just spend money to go talk to Latinos or any other voters about voting for Donald Trump. That means the people in those states were either getting information from a targeted House race or a targeted congressional race, or maybe some local sheriff's race, but there was no presidential. So every bit of information, folks are just gleaning from social media or from whatever places they gather information. In the old days, they read the newspaper when it was delivered, but only Mike Madrid still gets probably a newspaper delivered. So if you think about that, look how bad the performance was in New Jersey, New York. California will become more clear, but there's an obvious trend there of a place where lots of Latinos live. There are precincts in Queens, in New York, that voted for Donald Trump for the first time ever. Like, all of these things build onto themselves, and it just reinforces what we've been saying of there needs to be an autopsy. There needs to be a looking of everything that we're doing, because I would remind all of you this, and we've talked about it here, and it's just one measurement, is that Democrats spent historic amount of money on Spanish language advertising. Now, most of that came in the last 30 days. And to remind all of you, up until 30 days before the election, there'd only been $17 million spent in the first 8 months on Spanish language advertising by Democrats. Let me say that again, 18 million over like 6 or 8 months. And in the last 30 days, they dumped in another $20 million, bringing the total for Spanish language in just the presidential race up to just shy of $47 million. I know that's a lot of math, and I do it in my head, so it's even harder for y'all. But that's compared to Donald Trump's 6. Think about what I just said. 47 million for Democrats on the presidential race, 6 for Donald Trump. Again, just measuring one facet of the electorate, which were Spanish speakers. And we still got our ass whooped. Now, that should tell you something about we're obviously doing something wrong because we're spending a lot of money. Now, if they're not spending this money on Spanish language advertising, then I assume as a strategist, they're probably spending a whole lot of money on English advertising targeting Latino English speakers. But I'll tell you that I never saw anything specifically targeted to Latinos. And Chuck, how would you figure that out? I can't see it unless I'm looking at their buy sheets, but I didn't see things with lots of Latino families or ads that are made with an English voiceover actor like I do sometimes with some Chuck Rocha Jiu-Jitsu that's got a little bit of a Spanish accent in their English pronunciation of words, which makes a Latino know that I'm targeting them as an English speaker. I'm giving you all my secrets, but if you want to hire me, you call 1-800-I-WANT-TO-WIN. After that, you think about like, well, if they're not spending the money, or if they are spending the money, we're still losing, then we got to go look at, is that those ads even being delivered? There'll be other podcasts on this one that we'll talk about what were the ads, because I think, Mike, something good to look at maybe in December is it would be really interesting to look at the ads that Donald Trump was running and look at the ads that the Kamala Harris people were running. Because I thought a lot of the Kamala Harris ads were really good. But again, to Mike's point, one of the biggest things that Mike said that I agree with is this truncated, this little timeline over 100 days when everybody knows who Donald Trump is. And I'll finish this part and kick it back to Mike is in poll after poll after poll. And I said this again on TV before the election. I said Donald Trump should be whooping Democrats' ass because of two things. One is a majority of the country thinks that in polling, we're going in the wrong direction and that things cost less when Donald Trump was in office. Just those two things mean that Donald Trump should sweep the election. But in focus groups and polling, there's a group of folks who think that he's an idiot, but liked that things were cheaper then and still think the country's going in the wrong direction. And I assume that would be 10, 20, 25% of those voters would move towards Kamala Harris because they told me they don't like him. Well, guess what? They still voted for him and they still probably don't like him, but they think that the system is so corrupt and so messed up and they feel so forgotten and left out in some Democratic cities like New York or Los Angeles or others to where they would vote for somebody that they think is an idiot or that will break things just because they think things need to be broken and they wish gas, groceries, eggs, and other things cost the same thing they did 4 years ago before the pandemic. And I think that's actually what happened. And no matter what strategy you had in 100 days, she was going to be hard pressed because she ran a good campaign to beat somebody when you're running against those headwinds of somebody in the country looking for a change agent. And only Donald Trump in their mind was the one that was the change agent. Mike?
Chuck, I think that's exactly right. And let me say this. I think that explains the margin and the significance of the movement. When the Siena poll, New York Times Siena poll came out a week before the election, and only 20% of Latinos said the economy was good or excellent, that's smoke on the horizon. There's a wildfire coming, a prairie fire, right? That's what they call it in Texas, Chuck. There's a prairie fire coming, right? And you better be ready because that is just such a bad number for the incumbents. In many ways, I think Chuck is right. This could have been a lot worse. I'll also say this, and I think you heard me on this podcast. You certainly heard me say it at other places. The Madison Square Garden rally did hurt Donald Trump. I think it would have been bigger without that. You were seeing it in texts, Chuck. You were getting those responses. We were seeing it online. You can't tell me that it didn't have an impact. It did have an impact. And without those comments slowing the roll, you would have seen even bigger numbers. And I really think there needs to be a gut check on all of this stuff if there's going to be a new approach to how both parties, by the way, and I'm going to say it again. I don't think the Republicans have a silver bullet here, guys. Affordability is a huge problem. The economy is a big concern. But this transition away from the Democratic Party, and I'm saying it like that, it ain't to the Republican Party, although that's the way it is appearing and manifesting and showing up because nowhere else to go. But this shift away from the Democratic Party started 12 years ago, through good times, through bad times, with a black candidate, with a female candidate, with a black female candidate, with a white blue-collar worker named Joe Biden from Scranton. The Democrats have had 4 elections now in a row to really do a deep dive assessment. And they need to throw this bullshit that they talk about, misogyny, Latinos are misogynist, sexist, Latinos are racists, all of this stuff where Latinos are just getting crucified right now, vicious racism all over social media right now. And it's coming from black folks and it's coming from white progressives. And you know what? I didn't take this bullshit from white Republicans for the past 30 years to now sit down and take it from black folks and from white progressives. If you're going to be racist, and you're going to be stereotypical, you're going to have to fight me on that because I can quantifiably, demonstrably prove it's not true. We have enough elections where Latinos voted over 70% for Barack Obama, a black man. We have elections where 69% of them voted for Hillary Clinton, a white woman. We have elections where 59% voted for a white blue-collar worker. And we also now have new data showing that low 50s or mid to low 50s for a black woman from California, okay? But what is the one thing? All of these are very different, very perfect, and 3 of those 4, by the way, 3 of those 4 were running against Donald Trump. So you have the perfect laboratory to do some self-examination and say, maybe it isn't misogyny. Maybe it isn't racism. Maybe it is, but maybe it's not. But we've got perfect control groups to look at this and do some really good, earnest data assessment. But there is one solid, consistent through line. And that is the vote share has been decreasing every election cycle for the last 3 elections. That is not an accident. It is not coincidence. 3 times is a trend. And don't even get me started on the midterms because the midterms showed the same damn thing. So this is real. This is problematic. I don't believe that the Democrats have the right people to fix this problem, present company excluded, because Chuck has been banging on this drum for a very, very, very long time. He needs to be listened to. I think the Ruben Gallegoses of the world need to be listened to. These voices need to be elevated because, as Chuck has pointed out, over 90% of Democratic firms are white-owned, white-operated, white-decided upon. Okay, so are we shocked and surprised when a blue-collar guy like Chuck comes from Texas and saying, there's a problem, there's a problem, there's a problem. And you know what? There is a problem. Take a look at Texas last night, man, or Tuesday night. Holy shit. Starr County. Unbelievable. You want to know how bad the problem is? If you don't believe me on Donald Trump, of all people, Donald Trump, Ted Cruz won the Hispanic vote. Okay? He was down 26 points against Beto O'Rourke 6 years ago. Now he won it by between 2 and 9 points. Like, what does that tell you?
If the Latino vote, let me interrupt. If the Latino vote would have performed at the same level it did under Beto O'Rourke, all red is a senator.
Say that again for the people in the back, Chuck. That's huge. Say it again.
So if the Latino vote had performed at the same level for Democrats that it did for Beto O'Rourke, Colin Allred would be a U.S. senator.
Guys, what else do you want? How many more times do I have to say it? I'll write a book for you. Oh, wait, I did write a book for you.
Oh, damn it. I got one around here somewhere.
I gave you a book. I gave you a roadmap. I told you what states. I told you what generations. I told you what issues. I told you what worked. I told you what didn't. There's nothing else we can do here. Start a podcast with Chuck? Like, what else? At what point do you start saying, oh, wait a second. Maybe the math is real. Maybe the evidence is actual. And we'll be going, talking a lot more here on this podcast. But guys, I mean, we're doing all we could do. As much as I am disappointed in what happened Tuesday night, I am not the least bit surprised. I hope that there's a renewed look at all the operations, all the systems, all the people, all the decision making, everything from the ground up to start saying, wait a second. Because imagine 2028 if the Democrats lose another 7 or 8 points. And you're going to hear first right now, yes, that's possible. Yes, that's possible. It's
how many new Latinos, Mike? And you just said 5 million. Every year there's a couple million. So if Mike is wrong about what he's saying, if he's wrong, what are you doing with 2 million Latinos every other year that are coming of age? Who's talking to them?
Yeah, that's it. And so you've got to start understanding the game has changed, and you either adjust to the game or you start arguing about the rules. But I'll tell you what, 99 times out of 100, the person who's trying to compete in a game where they're arguing about the rules, they're losing. That's why you argue about the rules. It's like Donald Trump stealing an election. You lost. It's like people who lose the football game on a bad ref call. The reason you're arguing is because you're losing. That's why. Winning teams don't argue about the rules. You understand the rules, you play by the rules, and you start winning by the rules. And guys, that's what a pro-democracy coalition needs to start doing, because you can't leave behind or ignore the math anymore. Things have changed.
Yeah, and I think to your point, I look back, and again, I know I sound kind of solemn today. A is I'm a little bit tired. B is that I look for the silver linings in things. Ebony Payne says I'm the most optimistic person she knows because I'm always looking for a silver lining in things. And sometimes when things are the darkest, and let's be clear, I've been through some things that are very dark. I've been through things that a lot of us have been through, and you come out the other side and you're like, man, that happened for a reason. And I had to hit rock bottom, or I had to have this mess up in my life to figure out how you come back from that. Well, this may be exactly what that is for Democrats, because if we'd have just barely lost, and if we would have overperformed and did really great in Pennsylvania, but then messed up some Wisconsin, no. We lost everywhere with every demographic. Latinos are just one thing that we talk about because this is the Latino Vote podcast, but there should be a reckoning with Black men. There should be a reckoning with white women, for fuck's sake. Like, we talk about white women like they're going to save us all the time, but they let us down and they elected Donald Trump, not Latinos. But it gives us a chance to be like, okay, we lost. Now what are we going to do? Well, the first thing we're going to do is we got to elect a new party chair. Like, we're going to have a whole new party. There's going to be 30 MFers who are going to run for president of the Democratic Party and be a gigantic primary. For the first time in the history of our country, Donald Trump can't run for president again. So we're going to have a big primary on both sides to figure out who and what America should want. And we'll have a midterm in 2 years. I know you don't want to think about this. I know you're still pissed off because we lost this election. That's fine. Well, just like Kamala Harris said, you got to do something. And what we got to do is we got to rebuild our party. And I'll say this one final time that I'll probably be the ongoing mantra, and it makes some people in my party mad. But I've said this now I'm sick of saying it almost, for 48 hours on every TV that you've seen me on. And I've been on a lot of TVs in the last 48 hours. When they're like, Chuck, how, with their bleeding liberal tears, how did this happen? How could we let this happen? How did this all go down? And I say, very, very, try to sound smart. But I say, I joined this party in 1990 when I was 20 years old. And I joined it because they were going to ship my factory job at Kelly Springfield Tire Company in Tyler, Texas, to China or Mexico, because George Bush had negotiated a thing called the North America Free Trade Agreement. And when Bush had negotiated that, and there was talk of this, the union got involved because the union was like, whoa, we make things here. We want to keep making things here. And we don't want the corporations who, if they can make things over there that are as good as we're making here, but cheaper, they'll do that. So I joined the union, got involved in fighting back against sending my job overseas. And the first time I ever knew anything about Washington, D.C., I was making calls to congressmen saying, I'm a factory worker and don't send my job overseas. The second thing I fell in line with and I liked about joining the Democratic Party is we were pushing back on the bosses. The bosses represented the Republican Party. The bosses represented rich people and people that had all of the means and the breaks. I thought the system was rigged. Does that sound familiar? I thought we should drain the swamp and put some regular folks in. And then the third thing was I was tired of us spending money overseas on war. I didn't know where Iraq was. I didn't know where Afghanistan was. I was a dumb factory worker. And I just knew that my money and my paycheck, when I worked 4 hours of overtime And I tried to work 4 hours every week because it gave me a little extra money to do something with my boy. If I worked just 40, I could get by. But if I could get 4 or 8 more hours, I could do something extra. But what I knew is if I worked 4 or 8 hours extra, somehow the government was taking more money and almost half of all my wages for my overtime in taxes and things that I didn't understand as well. Why was I paying 50% taxes on 4 hours of overtime? And there's rich people in Washington. So why are we doing this? The system seems rigged against workers. Boys and girls, this ain't hard. This is how Donald Trump won. He related to the grievance of workers all around the country who felt like they've been left behind, like Chuck Rocha did 35 years ago. It's not rocket science. We have to return the party to talking to workers, the sanctity of work, talking about men who take showers after they get done with work and men that put on a tie like I have on today and take a shower before they go to work. But we've stopped talking about jobs. We've stopped talking about workers. We've stopped talking about that thing. We have to return to that if we're ever going to build this party out and expand it again.
Guys, I want everybody to replay that Chuck Rocha speech 4, 5, 8, 10 times over the next week. And I want you to, on Twitter or whatever social media platform, copy the new chair of the DNC on that, because that's what it is. That is what the Democratic Party was when Chuck Rocha joined the party. Listen to what he's saying. That is just truth right there. When I look at both parties right now, they have changed so dramatically. You're talking about a working guy who doesn't want his job moved out, who's concerned about taxes, not because he's trying to get capital gains or because he's a rich guy trying to, buy another company. He's trying to have a little bit of extra money to take his boy to the amusement park on the weekend. Guys, that is blue collar culture right there. As much as we talk about the culture wars, it's always devolved into this abortion, trans rights, marriage equality, legalization of marijuana. Nobody talks about blue collar culture anymore. The idea of blue collar culture is premised on one simple thing, and it is this: I am willing to play by the rules, put in my 40 hours plus a week, and I don't even have to get rich or get ahead. I just want to be able to leave my kids a better future. That's the contract I make with this country. I will play by the rules. I will show up to work. I will build your houses. I will build your machines. I will build
your kids, clean your house.
And the only thing I'm asking for is to put a little bit of my own work and money aside. I'll do it myself to be able to send my kid to college so that their life can be a little bit better than mine. That is the contract that has broken down. And what these same people that are struggling more now than ever, at least in the last 50 years, are hearing is, well, you're getting disinformation because your life is better than it was. Wage growth is up. The economy is doing great. The S&P 500 is doing fantastic. And these people are going, you know what? I ain't even asking for much. I'm asking to take my kid to get some cotton candy and a roller coaster ride. That's what I'm asking for, folks. And don't tell me I'm not suffering, because I am. The price of eggs are up. The price of gas is up. I can't afford another rent increase, let alone think about saving for a down payment for a house. Even though I'm building the damn houses, I can't afford the houses that I'm constructing here. And until that's listened to, you're going to keep getting more and more of the same. And that's fundamentally what we have been talking about for a couple of years on this podcast. Chuck's talked about it. He's lived it. He's lived his career doing it. I wrote a book on it. Well, I still love watching all these cable news show programs where they're talking to white pundits and black pundits about the Latino vote and what happened and what do they not understand. And it's like, guys, until our institutions figure this out, this is going to keep happening. And so my final wrap up on this mantra, on this speech, on this soliloquy here is this.
Whoa, silica, what? You caught what? Oh, you didn't catch that. Sorry.
There are going to be 5 million more Latino voters in 2028. If you don't think another 7 to 8 point shift is possible, you are not paying attention. Okay? I'm also going to tell you what I've been saying for 10 years. This is entirely fixable. It is entirely fixable. But the fact that the Democrats spent 4 press releases went out with historically early ad buys at historically large sizes of money, and that cash disparity Chuck just talked about. I hadn't heard that before. Don't doubt it. He watches the spend like a hawk. But to outspend Republicans by the amount they did, and to get this kind of an ass kicking, how much more wake up call do you need to say this isn't working? You're losing 3 times every time Donald Trump runs. He gets more vote share from Latinos. You're seeing Ted Cruz makes a 30-point swing with Latinos. All these Texas counties, and people are saying, "Oh, it's just the Rio Grande Valley. Nobody lives there." Look at Texas, guys. Go online and take a look at these maps. Andreas, let's throw one in the bottom, the comment section here. These rightward shifts, again, it's not just Latinos, but in heavily Latino. Starr County is 97% Hispanic. 97. It's one of the most Latino counties in America. Shifted dramatically to the right. I'm not saying there's a million people there. There's only like 15, 16,000 voters. But this never voted Republican before. All Republican. Okay? If you want to chalk this up to disinformation or Latinos are misogynist and Latinos are racist and whatever, you're part of the problem. You're part of the problem. If you can't talk to people about their own economic conditions in an honest, forthright manner, you're the problem. You're the reason this happened last night. Take a look in the mirror, because it ain't hard to figure out where the problem lies. It lies right in front of you as you look in that mirror while you're brushing your teeth in the morning. Sorry, Chuck. Now I'm getting a little righteous and pissed, but
oh my God, here he goes. All right, so look, let me bring this back to some common sense and stop using all them big words that he uses, and say that if you think about another thing that's set with me is that I don't want to hear you tell me that Joe Biden was a great president and passed laws that were amazing, because you know what? I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. He did things that will benefit this country from now on. You don't want to be honest? You want to hear a hard truth? He's going to have done things that makes Donald Trump look like a fucking savior, because things are going to get better. The economy is roaring now. It's going to continue to roar. Prices are going to go down, and you need to just screw your wig on tight, because you're going to be pissed because Donald Trump gets to take credit for all of it. What we never have done as Democrats, though, is talk about these things to voters. Voters gave Joe Biden no credit for anything that he had done and things that he had gotten past. So it's part of this is a communication as well, as talking to people to where they understand. And I'm not saying dumb down things or whatever. I'm just saying that you got to have a message that folks can relate to. And let me also jump in on myself. That's pretty fucking bad when you have to interrupt yourself to think about, like, where's the path? And what do we do when we're thinking about, like, what are actions? There's all kinds of stuff we can start be thinking about doing, but we have to be able to hold Republicans now, who have a really good shot at having all 3 branches of government, of holding them accountable while becoming the party of the worker. The other thing is, and think about this, we have been looking for these short-term fixes for a long-term problem. This is not something that just popped up in the last 6 weeks, but that's when we spent most of the money talking to Latinos. Folks had not been to Reading, Pennsylvania or Allentown so much in their life, except in the last 30 days. We should go to Allentown and Reading tomorrow and start putting together organization there and couple it with other righteous things. Mike, the white woman who represents Allentown and Bethlehem as a congresswoman who's a Democrat named Wild, she lost the race. This thing swept her up into that. So guess what? We've got to go recruit a candidate now to run in Pennsylvania 7 in an off-year election. And you know who it should be? It should be the Puerto Rican mayor of Allentown, who's a Democrat. He's somebody who should be running. This is what we got to start looking at: running campaigns differently, recruiting candidates differently. You want to beat Mike Garcia in LA? Maybe we should find a working class Democrat who can raise some money to run against Mike Garcia in that district, because we're going to lose again. All the votes are not in California. It's not looking good. But, you know, that was the donors' big thing. And so figuring that out is a thing. So, we got to recruit better candidates. We got to have more Latinos and folks in positions of power. But we got to have a real conversation with ourselves about our role in politics. Because if there's one thing we know now, if it has not been proven to you already, is the Latino vote, as Mike Madrid was wishing, is a truly marginal vote. So the Republicans got to come to us, the Democrats got to come to us, and everybody's got to come with their best ideas, and let's see whose ideas win. Because there's one thing for sure, unless something really crazy happens, is Donald Trump will not be on the ballot 4 years from now. It will be J.D. Vance. And you think Donald Trump is crazy? J.D. Vance has got a lot of money. They got some real ideas on what they want to do. So buckle up, Mike. What do you think?
Oh, look, I think that's right. And look, I mean, the coalitions in both parties are in flux. They are changing. And again, it is challenging all of our notions of who and what we are as Americans and as voters. But I do believe, and will remain consistent in this for at least the next decade, the party that is able to capture the hearts and minds of a multi-ethnic working class is going to be the dominant party of the next generation. I believe that firmly. I believe it more now after Tuesday night's election than ever before. And where I believed that Democrats were best positioned to do this before the 2020 election, I now consider them a pretty considerable underdog. They've got to stop acting like they're 4 points up in the last 2 minutes of the game. They're not. They're behind now. And even though Kamala Harris won the Latino vote, functionally the margins that Trump got give the Republicans an advantage. And here's what's different. And we'll go through the math in later episodes because the math is very important. Many of you guys will remember heading up into this election, I said, there are more white college-educated women than there are U.S.-born Hispanic men. That is true. But if you don't perform with those women and those men continue to move right, the math doesn't matter. You can fish in a bigger pond, like I was saying, but if you're not catching any fish, you're still losing the game. And that's what's happening, is the pond is getting bigger on the Latino side and the Republicans are catching more fish. And the Democrats have a slightly larger pond, but it's getting smaller every year, and they're not catching enough fish to overcome this mother lode that the Republicans are hauling out of their Hispanic pond. This comparison is getting weird.
Oh
now.
My God, damn!
But
this is so good.
I think everybody. I'm talking to fish to Chuck, who actually fishes. So all I got to say is this. I don't know what to say anymore. The alarm bells have been rung. We've been saying it enough. I believe that the Democratic Party is going to change, but here's the kicker. It only changes if you demand that it changes, by the way. If you sit around, and this is going to be my main message point to a bunch of Latino legislators who've asked me to come do a postmortem in a couple of weeks and explain what happened. My main message is this. Latinos, Democrats especially, it's your party now. If you're not taking control of this narrative, if you're not demanding that Latino voices lead and direct and advise and consult the party, then you're making a mistake. But here's the very strong corollary. You don't need people who are going to play into the stereotype of who we were 30 years ago. You need advice and policies that speak to Latinos where we're at now. That is something that the Democrats have not had for the past 10 years. They've been speaking. Let me tell you when I knew this race was lost, or at least when the Latino vote was going to slip away. Not the whole race, but I'm still a little bit shocked from that. When this Latino men problem kept emerging in everybody's polling, and they announced an Hombres con Biden campaign, I about ripped the last bit of hairs out of my head and was like, it's amazing how tone deaf the Democrats are about the problem. They finally acknowledge there's a problem. They finally find new pollsters to acknowledge what everybody else knows. And then once they get it, their solution is to double down on the cringy old stereotype. And I knew they finally, a few weeks before the election, understand the problem, but their solution is so tone deaf that this is not going to be good. These numbers are not going to be good. And you know what? They weren't. They weren't. They were historically bad. Chuck, we are at the point where Donald Trump is knocking on the door of where George W. Bush was at in 2004 when I was doing those campaigns and thinking Republicans will never hit 40% ever again. Trump may meet or exceed that number. Like, wake up, guys. Wake up.
No, I agree. And I think that we'll have longer conversations. We wanted to get on here this week, as soon as the election was over, to make sure that you got our thoughts. There's lots of people on Twitter and lots of folks out there that value our opinion. And it doesn't mean the end. It means that we have an opportunity now to reset, go back and learn. I think a lot more people realize that we have a problem now. Now, will we really work to fix it? That's an argument that I think that we will wait for another day. But I do think that there's almost no way, even though there's a few stupid people and a few racist Black people, white people, other people out there trying to blame Latinos for shit that's just not true. I don't care about the idiots. I'm not going to raise the idiots up here. But I think almost everybody that I've talked to realizes that there's something really, really interesting going on here and that we're moving the wrong way. And look, I have been a big critic of my own party. I also love my party. I don't vote Republican. I vote Democratic, and I want to be a part of the solution. I think my firm and other folks can be a part of the solution. And I think that we can get there. And we have an opportunity now moving into midterm elections. And now guess what? These Republicans are the damn dog that caught the car, because now they got to all govern and they get to be judged off of how they're going to govern. Are they going to start deporting Latino families? Like, just stay tuned. I don't want to put any fear into any of y'all, but this is a way that we can really distinguish the difference in the way that the value set is for one party or the other. Right now, they could just throw rocks at at Joe Biden. Now we get to hold a Trump a presidency accountable. But we'll do all of that, and we'll come back again next week. I think Mike's going to come on next week without me because I'm going to be out of town. He's going to have a guest host on with him next week because, as Mike has done, and how I like to know that I have had all the influence I can with Mike, is he talked about fishing nonstop. I'm leaving Saturday morning because I had a trip planned that I was looking forward to all year, and I'm going to go to the Baja, Mexico, Mike, in a little fishing village that's down a dirt road that's called Puerto San Carlos. And I'm going to fish for some striped marlin off the front of a panga with a 13-weight fly rod. It's the biggest hand-to-hand combat you can do with one of the big billed fish, fishing bait balls. So I'm looking forward to getting away and doing that. I could use a break. But Mike, I'll let you have our final words before I take us out.
I want everybody to be hopeful. I know it's a tough time. I know there's still a lot of shock. I know that there's anger. I know that there's fear. All of those are valid for the moment, but you can't sit with that too long and allow it to paralyze you. This is a very important inflection point, and I think Chuck said it best, and I think it's a good way to wrap it up. It's better to have lost bigger here than small, because a small loss, a small drip, drip, drip erosion is easy to ignore. That's what got this coalition to where it's at right now with Latino voters. For 12 years now, people have said, oh, it's not a big deal. It's just a couple points. Oh, it's just a couple points. It's not just a couple points now, okay? Trump isn't just knocking on the door. He's kicked the door in. And that's good, because I want everybody to really, really listen to what I'm saying. This is entirely fixable. It's entirely fixable. But it's going to require some very serious self-reflection. And with that comes a better politics. Most importantly, it becomes a better politics for our people. As one of my good friends, Rosario Marin, said, former U.S. Treasurer of the United States, a Republican who left the party when Trump became the nominee, and was texting me last night. She said, you know what the good news is? The good silver lining is all of these Latinos going into the Republican Party are going to moderate the party. And she's right. In the same way that Latinos are the moderate voice in the Democratic Party, we will start to moderate the Republican Party. Why? Because we're focused on working class issues. And both parties have lost sight of that. Once you start talking to people about bread and butter economic issues and the promise of blue collar values and blue collar culture and the American dream, all the crazy extremism starts to fade away. We're going through an extraordinary time, extraordinary moments. The fear and fright is understandable, but they've got to be used for something positive and recognize. All of this is entirely fixable if the parties demonstrate a policy prescription and a genuine commitment to our community. And you know what that means? It means a better America. So with that, let's sign off. I'll talk to you guys next week. Keep hope, keep fighting, and tune in next week. And as my good buddy Chuck says, call your mama if you haven't called her. She's probably a little bit worried today. And let's can't wait for the fish stories that come back when Rocha's back online with us. We'll talk soon.
Y'all be good.